All right, hello and welcome to another episode of Behind the Mind. I'm your host, Kevin Meiselman, and today I'm joined by senior writer for ESPN College Football. He's been covering the sport since 2002, Ivan Maisel. And although I am a big sports fan and would love to talk college football for an hour, I know you guys are tuning in for mental health. So we're going to maybe creep in a little sports, but for the most part, we're just going to try to reduce stigma, raise mental health awareness, and who better to do it with someone who is a trained journalist, knows how to communicate, and has sort of become an expert in the mental health, subject matter. So, Ivan, I just want to thank you so much for joining the show.
Well, thank you, Kevin. I'm a big believer in your project and your passion with this podcast, and I hope we can reach some people.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to say, your story with mental health, although it's very tragic, I know you've been able to gain a lot of insight. And that's what I think a lot of people listening to this show are going to come away with is a bit more knowledge when it comes to maybe suicide prevention and maybe looking out for signs related to mental health struggles that, maybe they didn't really understand just yet. So I want to ask you a little bit about how, as a big sports writer, I know you've been covering, the last year or so, maybe two stories related to mental health. So talk about that personal story you went through that, kind of woke you up to what mental health really is.
Well, sure. The nearly 6 years ago, in February of 2015, our middle child, our only son, Max, ended his life as a junior in college, and he was at school. We had no idea the depth to which he was struggling, and we were completely caught unaware. Uh, so, in out of our grief and out of our loss, both my wife and I began trying to do more to raise awareness of mental health in general and suicide prevention in particular. She has been active in our local community. I have participated. I am on the board of directors of a foundation, the Jordan Porco Foundation, that creates programs for both high school and college students to raise mental health awareness, and to create to teach peer counseling is probably the best way to put it. And the Porco Foundation has run programs, hundreds of campuses across the country. They've really done a great job of outreach. So obviously, through no probably the last thing I wanted I wanted to create awareness of, the way I came about it, obviously. But in January of 2018, when Washington State quarterback Tyler Hilinski ended his life, obviously that piqued my curiosity. And Tyler Hilinski had some things in common with our son Max. So they were both middle children. They were both away at college. Neither his parents, Mark and Kim Hilinski, nor my wife and I had any idea of the degree to which our sons were struggling. So with all that in play, I reached out to the Hilinskis in the summer of 2018 to tell their story of what it's like to be parents in this situation. And we also Kevin, had the similar positions of being in the pub, doing our grieving in public. My story became national news because I work for ESPN. The Hilinskis became a national story because their son was a college football player, and a prominent one at that. So there were ways that we the things we had to deal with that were unique to us, and in that sense, it was very easy to establish a connection with the Hilinskis and gain their trust to tell their story and hopefully to help others.
Yeah, I thought it was really fascinating in the college football special I watched on YouTube that, you're a journalist and you're supposed to keep yourself out of the story, but you said in this one, I just can't do that. Talk a little bit about how just that was a place of solace for you, probably too, going through what you went through. And, while tragic, you don't wish that to happen. I'm sure there was a sense of comfort just knowing that there was someone else uh, out there that just had those feelings that we want to prevent as many parents as possible from having.
Well, yeah, sure. I mean, the ability with as a deeply emotional story such as that, the hardest thing for a journalist to do is to gain the trust of the subject of the story and to intrude on their emotional life. And especially with a story like this, where there is so much pain involved. Normally, I would tread very lightly around someone like this. And honestly, before Max died, it'd be a story I wouldn't go anywhere near because I was scared of it. I didn't want to intrude. I didn't want to be anywhere near that kind of pain. Uh, I didn't have any choice. I got thrown into that pain, but to your point, I learned how to coexist with it, and I learned how to understand that you could live your life and deal with that pain. That you could good things were going to continue to happen in your life as well as bad. You were going to continue to live your life, and so with that perspective, I think it was much easier for me to approach the Helinskis and just say, "Hey, you know, I'm 3 years ahead of you on this road. I'd love to come to talk with you. There's probably some things that I can help you with." And to be honest with you, Kevin, fathers who had lost their sons had reached out to me in the weeks and months after Max died. So there's also a feeling that you really should pay it forward, that other people had reached out to me and that perhaps I should reach out to them. So all of that played into my thinking as I figured out how to get my arms around this story.
Yeah, it truly is admirable to try to make the most of it for other people because there's always lessons to be learned, especially if you have that national presence, that capability. So to come on podcast and talk about it just to help people is it's brave and more just it's difficult to discuss. And I said that to the Helinskis. They were on my podcast, the Mark and Kim, and I said that to them too. It's to just continue talking about it over and over again. I can't imagine that pain. So to just do it and try to help people is really, really awesome.
Well, thank you, but it's really not as difficult as it seems to outside people.
Okay.
The hard part is living it. But as I discussed with Mark and Kim, and we continue to talk about it, this is what our life is like, and really to tell other people about what your life is like is it may be uncomfortable for them, but we go through the uncomfortable part whether we tell the story or not. So to me, telling the story and explaining to people, this is what this feels like. I think in my mind that makes it easier for them to understand. Civilians, is the term I use. It makes it easier for civilians to understand, and maybe they won't be as scared uh, to approach us, and maybe they won't be as scared to approach somebody they know who is grieving. If we can, if I could tell the Holinsky story, and if I could tell my own story, which I am doing in a book that's publishing next year, um, you know, I think that can only help and break down those barriers and allow people to feel more comfortable in approaching someone who is in that sort of pain.
Can you speak a little bit about the book?
Oh, I'd be delighted to. I could speak a lot about the book. Uh,
Please.
the the title of it is "I Keep Trying to Catch His Eye," which is about Max, and the subtitle is a memoir of loss, grief, and love. And sort of to extrapolate what I was saying, the way I came to deal with all that I had to deal with was coming to an understanding that the grief that I felt and continue to feel is really just my love for Max in a different form. And you hear so many people talk about uh, grief as painful. And yeah, of course, the loss to me is painful. And maybe that's a distinction without a difference. But what worked for me was thinking of my grief for Max as just a different form of love. And once I did that, it really made it much more tenable for me and much easier to process what I was feeling. And so the book is about Max, and it's about my relationship with Max, and it's also about my journey, for lack of a better word, of coming to that realization.
Absolutely. And I really just want people who are listening to this episode to come away with maybe a few lessons about whether it's signs of suicide or just when you're struggling through depression and sometimes, it goes unnoticed because you don't express it in a way maybe someone would think is depression. So I want you to talk a little bit about back in time, when this was going on. I know I've mentioned you, I mean, I've seen you mention in videos before that I've come across that he expressed signs, but you weren't really aware at the time that they were signs. So, what do you think is important for people to know about Max's story when it comes to preventing a decision like that and just seeking help through all that pain?
Well, I would, anything I tell you, Kevin, I would start with the caveat that I am not an expert in suicide. I'm an expert in one suicide. I can tell you about what happened with Max. I would urge people to seek out help either for themselves or for people whom they feel are struggling. And of course, the trick is looking for those signs of people who are struggling, and the withdrawal. Max was kind of in the last weeks. He died in February, and he had been home on Christmas break, and he was a little withdrawn. But we just figured, well, he's a college kid. He's tired of dealing with his parents. That's not the first. Wouldn't even be the first of our children. So we attributed it to that, which was turned out to be a spectacular misread. But at the time, based on the knowledge we had, that's how we thought. We came to learn after he died that he had sought out help on campus from the mental health professionals on campus, and uh, and had received some help. But even they didn't read the signs he was giving exactly correctly. They're tricky, but I think from what I have learned about suicide, if someone has a plan, if someone says something to you about suicide, ask them if they have developed a plan, and if are they going if they make a statement about suicide, that's one thing. If they say they've got a plan or they've thought about how to do it, that raises it up to a level where you need to take action, and they need to seek out professional help. I would venture to say if they're talking about suicide, they need professional help anyway. But if they have a plan in mind, then it's a lot more serious. So those are the biggest red flags that come to mind immediately.
Absolutely. And that's why I just wanted you to share it because even if you aren't an expert, there's always something to be learned just by going through that experience. And, I definitely don't think that any one person could take the place of, all the resources that are out there. There's so many foundations, all these suicide prevention services are there. So I urge all of my listeners to take advantage of that if you're listening, but also ask for help. Because do you think that there was a fear to maybe talk about these issues for Max, like with you? Was there like something to that where mental health wasn't discussed enough? Because it's hard for a lot of families to just even have that as a daily thing to check up on, and hopefully in the future more families can kind of have that in the normal checklist of is this going okay?
Well, yeah, and that's a good question. And Max knew. I mean, Max had been seeing. We weren't scared of mental health treatment. Max had been going to see a therapist for since middle school, so he knew we were not scared of it. He knew we were willing to get him whatever help he needed. But Max was a very private kid. He didn't like to talk about his feelings or his problems. And at some point, if you keep asking somebody, to tell you what's wrong and they don't tell you, you know, what do you do? I mean that, and obviously, again, with hindsight, it all seems perfectly clear. But at the time, you know, we didn't understand just how dire his condition he was in, and we would ask him, and he would just wall us off. Um, the Am I answering your question?
Yeah, yeah. No,
I
no,
feel like
no.
I'm answering some of it, but I've forgotten the rest of it.
No,
What did I miss?
well, no, I just wanted to maybe, yeah, have you allude to the idea of, was mental health talked about in your family? And you mentioned that with him going to therapy for such a long time, and it didn't seem like you were a family that was scared to discuss these issues. So that just shows how much of an illness this really is. You could have so much support in place, and sometimes your brain just betrays you, is how I like to call it.
No, I think that's exactly it. And one of the first people that reached out to me, Kevin, is a woman at Duke Medical School who I grew up with, who is an expert on children and trauma, children and psychological trauma. And her name is Robin Gurwitch, Dr. Robin Gurwitch, and she's a national expert. And she said to me, if someone wants to end their life, unless they tell you they're going to do it on Tuesday at 8:30 at this place, and you can be there and stop them, there's nothing you can do about it. You can beg them to get help. You can direct them to help. You can make sure that get mental health professionals to assist them, but it, you know it is still going to be up to them. And a lot of times, as you put it, their brains betray them. And uh, one of the things that survivors of suicide, someone who loses someone to suicide, has to learn, and it's a tough lesson to learn, is that we look at it with rational thought and we consider it with rational thought. And how, what could we have done differently? Oh, we must have had some role in this. Oh, it's our fault. That's rational thinking. And the act of suicide is by definition not rational thinking. And there's no way in the end to truly understand how someone gets into that position to where they think that's the answer. I mean, to me, what I've found, what comfort I take from what Max did is that he was in such pain that this was his way of stopping it. And now he's not in pain anymore. Um, we're in pain. Somebody said to me, well, a lot of times you can think of grief as the person you lost. They transferred all the pain they were in to you because you and your family can divide it up and carry it. And it's not as difficult for you as it had been for them. And that's a nice that's a nice thought, and it has given me some comfort, but largely how I look at it is he was in such great pain that this was his solution to it. And that's just, that hurts, but that's what happened.
Yeah, and that doesn't mean people listening who are in those places right now, those low places, should just settle for that solution. But I definitely see how you as a father would take comfort in that, just knowing he wasn't suffering anymore.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I would never recommend to anyone listening that, you shouldn't just keep trying to fight to stay alive and find those ways that are different, to keep, to solve that pain without,
Yeah.
finding a
And I don't, obviously that's not what I think, one of the other little sayings I heard early on to that point is that suicide is a permanent solution to a temporary problem, much like tattoos. Uh, uh, I think whatever pain someone is in from a mental health, uh, from mental health, it is temporary, and there are avenues of getting help and seeking help and looking for guidance, and obviously that is a preferable solution.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's really, really well said that it's a permanent solution to a temporary problem. I can't agree with that anymore. I've had my share of lows. I've struggled with bipolar disorder since I was a very little kid. My family's been so supportive, and it's been a long journey to be the person I am now and be okay. And I try to give back by doing this podcast and shining light on mental health. But the amount of times that I've been in those places, I just think I'm one of those examples that it is temporary, that I've been in those moments, but I've come out and, loved life. And there's going to be something else in my life that happens where that temporary pain is going to come back. But, the more you can learn that it is temporary, just like an injury in sports, you could fight through it and be stronger because of it. So thank you for shining light on that.
Yeah, no, sure. And yeah, to that point, rehab is, getting better is hard and it takes work, but it's obviously uh, what you have to do, and you do feel better.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and it's good analogy when we're talking about sports, for sure. And I definitely want to transition this a little to what you do as a writer for ESPN. I think it is fascinating that you've been able to write stories about mental health in the college football world. I really liked your story on a coach named Brent Guy who kept his bipolar disorder struggles in the dark for pretty much his entire coaching career, and finally is now open and getting help, and odds are helping other people right now. Can you talk a little bit about how that story, along with others, has been maybe a little bit cathartic for you to maybe in Max's honor now shine light on mental health, and help other people in the process?
Well, and that's exactly it, Kevin. Brent Guy reached out to me through mutual friends, and he told me his story. And he he was diagnosed as bipolar when he was a 29-year-old, 30-year-old assistant football coach, and did never told a soul in football. The only people that knew were uh, his doctors and his wife. They didn't even tell their children, and he did it all to avoid dealing with the stigma of bipolar disorder in specific and mental health in general. And he finally, 3 years ago, decided that was not the way he wanted to live his life anymore, and that he wanted to make his condition known, have people understand that he uh, had and continues to function uh, as a successful person in his field, and tell his story to inspire others with bipolar disorder, to not give up and to understand that with treatment, bipolar disorder is a condition that you can live with. And it's a marvelous story. He's a terrific ambassador. He's working for the National Association of what's it, NAMI? What
Nami.
yeah, NAMI, in Tulsa where he lives, and he's a he's a terrific spokesman for it.
That's amazing. And you've also covered the Big Ten, implementing mental health, programs into their entire conference. Just maybe talk a little bit about the transformation you've seen. You've been covering college football since 2002, been covering sport just at ESPN. You've been covering sports for much longer. Have you seen this shift in mental health awareness and the way coaches, you've done so many interviews over the years, just how has, even if it's not a specific clinical diagnosis, like, oh, this coach helped a player with bipolar disorder, just the idea of putting their minds at the forefront of what's important. Coaches understanding their players' mental health is as important as anything.
Sure, absolutely. I think the younger generation of coaches understands that mental health is as important as physical health, and that mental health injuries, for lack of a better phrase, can be as insidious and as detrimental to a player's performance as physical injuries. That is not a message that has easily made its way into the very macho world of college football, where toughness is seen as not asking for help. And one of the big messages that is being conveyed to student athletes, not only in football but in every other sport at the NCAA level, is that the displaying toughness is asking for help. That's is understanding that that's what you need to do to get better, and that if people are going to who don't understand are going to uh, you know make fun or look down on you, that's their problem. There is an enlightenment that is happening with a younger generation. To me, it's very analogous to the way that cancer was looked upon in the 50s. People didn't talk about cancer. They didn't really discuss it out loud. And now we don't, now it's talked about. Nobody looks at it as anything other than a disease. And we would, I think all of us who have become aware of the nature of mental illness would love to see that same consideration be given to mental illness, where people just look at it as a disease and not as a character defect.
Absolutely. And I think you alluded to this, something you just said on the United podcast. That's the Helinski's podcast that you were on it. And I heard you talk about that idea of, in a sport that's so macho, so masculine like football, to have mental health even find its way into the conversation at all just says so much about the transformation. And I don't know if it was you or the host, Dr. Josie Nicholson, that said it, but we think of bravery and courage as fighting through something that's scary, something that's difficult. And why can't that be mental health? If it's scary and difficult, going towards that just shows how brave you are when, there is a fear to seek help and, put your mind first. I just think that the more this conversation is shined light on, the more college recruiting classes over and over are just going to be a little more willing to take care of themselves mentally, because it's as important as anything. You're not going to be the best college football player that you could be if you're not taking care of your mental health, by whether it's mindfulness or just asking for help when you need it.
Well, and that's exactly it, Kevin. And to bring it back to where we started this part of the conversation, the Big Ten is being proactive at the direction of the new commissioner, Kevin Warren, is being proactive in conveying that message not only to the student athletes but the coaches and administrators at the 14 athletic departments in the conference. And it's important to Commissioner Warren, and I think that message is taking hold across the conference. And in a world and in a sport where toughness is seen, by not asking for help, by ignoring treatment, by playing, when you're hurt. That attitude has been part of football for generations, and it's really remarkable to see the progress in the last 5 to 10 years of how uh, coaches and administrators and trainers are all beginning to understand that no, you have to be physically healthy and you have to be mentally healthy in order to be your best, and that they need to do whatever they need to take whatever steps they can to make sure that the players are not only physically healthy but mentally healthy.
I think that's very well said and a perfect sentiment, for all of that whole topic. Honestly, thank you so much for all the insight you've provided on this issue. It's just I'm really really grateful to have you on the show, knowing how much I love sports, knowing how much I love mental health. In a sense, I try to be an example of one of these mental health stories. I struggled so much, and to know that if I could tell my eighth grade self that was so depressed that one day it'll be okay, you'll interview ESPN reporters, pro athletes, and shine light on mental health at the same time, I'd say you're crazy. But that's just proof that you can get through these low moments, and it takes the conversation. And I just want to thank you so much for shining light on mental health through my podcast, through ESPN, through everything. It's been really, really cool for me to see.
Well, thanks, Kevin, and you are obviously to be commended for what you're doing, and I hope that your message and my message and this message continues to reach the people it needs to reach.
Oh, thank you so much. And if there's any last advice, I ask this to every single guest on the show that I've ever had on. Any last advice that you would give to someone who's struggling right now with mental health, whether it is a clinical diagnosis or they're just feeling lost, whether the pandemic impact is bothering them and it's kind of thrown their life out of whack? Just what advice would you give to someone struggling right now?
It's okay to ask for help, and if you ask somebody for help and they don't help you, then ask somebody else, and keep asking till you get the help you need.
All right. Thank you so much. Ivan Maisel, ESPN reporter for college football. He's been a writer since 2002. He's had so much amazing work. Go check him out. And especially if you care about mental health, there's some stories on the website right now that are really, really moving. Thank you, Ivan, once again.
Thanks, Kevin.